Hello, everyone, and welcome to Build with Sophia. I'm your host for today, Sophia, and I'm delighted that you all are here. Today's guest is Joy Klemmer, an executive entrepreneur, U.S. Army Reserve officer, and accomplished author whose career has been taken through business, national defense, veterinary health care, procurement, technology, infrastructure, and public education. Joy has led large organizations, managed multi-business dollar procurement portfolio, advised leaders at the highest level, and written several books on leadership, entrepreneur, infrastructure, and organizational performance. His unique perspective bridge business strategies, government innovation, and leadership, helping organizations understand why success underestimates depends on one thing, execution. Joe, welcome to Build with Sophia. It's an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you. It was very good to be here.
Joe, your entrepreneurial journey began with selling soft drinks from a blue cooler as a child. Looking back, what was that early experience teach you about business and leadership?
At a very young age, it was looking to solve problems and building systems to solve them. And so I remember in fourth grade, I was looking to try to solve the problem that I didn't have the finances and resources to get baseball cards or football cards or the ice cream man. And so for me, it was building a solution of going out, getting sodas, essentially getting a lot of rejection, but it taught me perseverance and it takes a team. And so as I was successful, I had gained enough money to buy a cooler. Now I'm offering cold drinks. Then I'm getting some of the other kids involved. Now we have kids at every corner trying to sell. And then we decided to expand from there. And although it wasn't a large enterprise, much smaller than some of the other things that I've been a part of, it's the foundation, right? It's building that system of execution. Maybe it started with a few $100s in elementary school, but it translated to much, much more later on.
You've worked across private business, military service, healthcare, technology, education, and government. What common leadership challenges have you seen across these sectors?
I've looked at two separate things that can be such an opportunity for all organizations. The first one is systems. When we are hiring individuals, we are looking for them to succeed. We are not hiring individuals with no educational background, with, someone who will not succeed. We want the best in our organizations. Then why don't they succeed? And a lot of times they'll translate back to these systems at hand. And so that may be tool, that may be not clear structure and systems where you know what is your responsibility, what are you accountable for, and are those systems in place actually reinforcing that behavior? A lot of times companies will have these strategic visions and missions, and they don't translate back to each individual. Or they say they're strategic, but they're anything but. So a lot of it is based on the systems. The other part is we are people. And so there is a people component. Emotional intelligence is large. Diversity is so important. But do you understand the high context, the low context, and really appreciate people's backgrounds and the differences that can be brought in? And so a lot of times organizations will look for a specific personality type, and doing so will not bring in different perspectives of different opportunities that can gain market share or different efficiencies, or even look at different problems a different way. And so it really stunts their growth. And so there's what I would say is there's systems and then there's people. And if you could get those two taken care of, you should be in a position to really drive change in it.
You often say that power is measured by execution. What does that phrase really mean? And why is it so relevant today?
We run in a social media society. We are a lot of times in front of television or screens. We were constantly bombarded by sound bites. And so there's a lot of people who will go out there and say, we are the best. But are you? Are you executing at the best? Or you will say, I'm going to create change. And as soon as that television screen turns off, nothing has changed. And so we are in a society where essentially it's like Hollywood. It's entertainment. But there isn't anything in the back end really driving change and initiative for change. And so what that means is you really need to put the systems in place and drive what is being told. And so sound bites are great. There is your vision. But now let's bring the execution at hand and build the systems in place that reinforce what you're looking to do. And so, especially in the political realm, it's stop pointing fingers at each other, stop blaming other individuals. And I think that that's not only in politics on a government sense, but that's politics in companies as well. Don't blame the other vendor. Don't blame the contractor. Don't blame your peer or something else that is stunning you. You need to look at what you can do in your area of capacity and start doing it and really take accountability for those actions.
You have led teams responsible for complex national projects. How do great leaders create alignment between people, system, and organizational goals?
It is clarity throughout the entire system. And so, if the mission is, for example, the United States Army Corps of Engineers, one of the projects is a large dam. And so, if we're aligned and saying, this is the project we're going to succeed, I'm going to align with the project managers, with the budgets, with the engineers, with the contractors. I am going to ensure that everybody understands what they're accountable for, what that time frame is, what that budget is, and what are those constraints. Then once that clarity is brought, I'm going to hold them accountable for that. And I'm going to make sure that I'm not going to wait 5, 6, 7 months to be able to address the issue. I'm going to address the issue right then and there. And that doesn't mean we go straight to a corrective action or something that is providing liquidated damages or something like that. What it is I'm going to communicate and I'm going to document so that it doesn't happen again. But the whole point of it is I'm going to build a solution and try to get it back on track. And when you do that and hold people accountable and there's clarity to exactly what the expectation is, a lot of times you get great individuals on a project and you get it done on time, if not before, as well as within budget, if not under budget.
Artificial intelligence is transforming every industry. In your view, where are leaders getting AI wrong and how should organizations approach it differently?
AI is a tool. It is a fantastic, great tool, but it is a tool nonetheless. I would look at it the same way I would as when cars came into the industry, right? So there would be horses, there would be horse and buggies, people would be walking. And now you have this vehicle that absolutely you can go from one end to the country to the next within days, not months. And so that change is a tool. But in the same way, you can drive a car off-roading and totally crash it. Whatever you're doing with the tool is what you're going to get out of it. And so a simple example of that is if you put a simple prompt, give me an email, you're going to get a very nice AI fluffed email. But if I'm going to a prompt and say, I am talking to a senior executive, I'm looking to just address the benefits. I need the bottom line first. I need analytical tools. And please share with me different resources that maybe I didn't find so that I can build the tools. Now I at least have a framework. But now I have to go into next steps. I have to go into those and look for the substantive information. And so what it is a great critical thinking tool, at least for AI generation, that goes back and forth. Some of the media, some of the photos that come out of AI, these are essentially, some are professional sense and professional quality that usually would take teams. So now where you would have entire teams building these products, you could do it with individuals, but it's the same way. You need to be very, very specific with the input so you can get that output. And then as far as agionic AI, especially in procurement, you need to make sure that the knowledge and the insights are very, very, basically there's a clear AI governance, because when you're dealing with selecting vendors or proposal analysis, you want to make sure that those confidential information is protected. You want to make sure that it is making the right decision. It is clearly evaluating. And so at the end of the day, you still need people to make those decisions. But as far as administration goes or producing documents, I think AI is a great decision. So for those people looking to do AI, fantastic. Make sure that there's a return on investment, but also make sure there's a clear plan in place so that you get the quality for that company or organization.
You have written extensively about institutional excellence. What separates organization that has constantly succeed from those that continually underperform?
So each of the four books are different areas. So I have Strategic Synergy, which is a leadership book. It talks about the background of leadership, talks about principles, and also going into a transformational leadership standpoint. And so basically, it's being a leader outside yourself and making a larger impact. But it also talks about how to lead in newer times with remote teams, with a lot of the technology that's here today, and using best case scenarios and best leaders that were successful to build on those principles. And so it is a basic leadership book where it should give you insights where you can lead. Infinite Potential Leadership is a framework that essentially builds off of some of the other leadership frameworks, but drives people's potential greater. So for the management, it will drive it to a much better. Institutional Excellence talks more to enterprise level and board executive, people on the board, people on the C levels, and essentially it's bringing reality back to your companies. And so as we bring in AI tools, as we have disruption, as we have transformation, you may not be as competitive as some of the other companies. And because it's a larger company, you may be diverting much greater because you won't be able to change as quickly. That's bureaucracy. And so I think a lot of great companies will look at mergers and acquisitions and look to get some of these technologies implemented into their organization. However, you have to assess and realize that. And so it really talks about the reality and how to get back to that reality. The last one is the procurement revolution, specifically to procurement. Procurement was a transactional piece in before, and between driving costs down, category management, strategic vendor relations, it has turned into a strategic place in organizations. And so each of the books are essentially different principles and systems that allow you to be successful. But what is the outcome of those? It has brought 60 efficiency to the Department of War in some of their combat operations. It has brought complete backlog from the Department of Veteran Affairs, from essentially for 2,000 hospitals and 9 million veterans. It has driven change in some of the most bureaucratic areas and driven teams to excellence.
You have worked in environments where decisions carried significant consequences. How has that shaped your approach to leaders under pressure?
So when I was in the private sector, a lot of it was self-driven. And so when you're making a decision, a lot of times it's for yourself and being selfish in that decisions. And the outcome of that is maybe not a sustainable work where I'm working over 100 hours, I'm not taking care of myself and I get burnt out, or even I'm not taking care of relationships and, other things outside of the workplace, and it becomes unhealthy. And so you're sacrificing and you are moving ahead, but for what? And it's not necessarily good for your team. It's not good for your organization necessarily, and it's not good for yourself. And so what had shifted is when you start looking at the impact, when you're making a business decision, and it could mean the life of a soldier, it could mean the protection of a nation or a particular event, that gets it outside yourself. It is no longer about you. It is about your team. It is about the mission. It's about the nation, its allies. And so one of the most important things is the shift from selfish to selfless. And, it may seem, I think a lot of times more religiosity. It's not. What it does is it takes the entire team to get something done, and you become more productive, more efficient, more effective, as well as you can maintain resilience and sustainability. And so from a business standpoint, it's extremely important, especially when you start looking at more of an enterprise view from a top-down perspective.
Trust in institutions has become a global conversation. What practical steps can leaders take to build trust within their organizations?
I think the best way to look at how you can trust is look at the people that you can't trust. And don't do that. And so individuals will, especially those that are selfish, how can you trust their leaders? How can you trust what they say? Because they will take the accolades, and then anything that goes wrong will go down to their team or their team members. And so you really need to be that person of protection where you say, hey, if there's something wrong, I'm accountable as the leader, and I will take that on and I will fix it. Whether that's a systems issue, whether it's a personnel issue, whether it's an accountability issue, whatever that is, I'm going to find a solution and build a system around it so it doesn't happen again. But it's my fault. But if there is successes, it is the team. It is completely that member who had put in the work, who had put in the extra hours, who had those conversations, who initially made those phone calls or created those documents, and making sure that they get the accolades that they deserve. And so that's part of it. The other part of it is stop lying. There is no reason to lie in business. If you are transparent, if you are ethical, and you're just honest, if there's a problem, it can be addressed. And I think a lot of times when it goes up the chain, there is a fear of, I don't want to say what's wrong. Well, unless you have leaders seeing what's wrong, they can't fix it or they can't change it. And so you get these heroes and organizations that will come up with all these different workflows outside of the written documentation, and it works, but nobody understands that they're doing something outside of what was produced. And so the result is when that person leaves, everything kind of goes to the wayside and they don't understand why. Now, if we're transparent and we can be honest, we can trust each other to say, hey, listen, it's not about you. I'm not trying to put you in a bad place, but I am trying to fix the organization and make it better. And as long as you have that mindset, I think it could go well. If you work on the system, you work on the problems, you work to have a good team, a good team component, it's okay to ask them how they're doing. In certain places, there's low context, and that it's totally understand if you say, how's your family? Certain cultures and certain places are like, do not talk to me about anything outside of work, and that's okay. But there's other areas and other places in the country and other countries where if you don't do that, they can't trust you. And so I think you have to understand cultural differences as well in each individual. And the only way to do that is to have conversations and build a relationship. And so if you're building a relationship based on honesty, transparency, ethical frameworks, you're not after the individual, you're after the problem. Now, that doesn't mean that if you don't have a good system, maybe a problem with ethical and you could address that, but that's not your go-to. You always want to have that positive intent and then build the data around what is truly the bottleneck and what really is wrong.
Many entrepreneurs focus heavily on vision but overlook operational excellency. Why is execution often the missing piece between ambition and results?
Dreams are great. And I think a lot of, especially founders and entrepreneurs, you go in, I'm going to be the greatest X, Y, and Z. I am going to become the next, whoever that top leader is. Perfect. Fantastic vision, fantastic dream. I hope you're solving a problem big enough to hold that to the fire. But the reality is that after that vision, what are you doing to get there? And so you need to have strategic principles in place that's going to help you guide there and kind of give you the left and right confines so that you can really drive towards that vision. From there, you need to have operational framework to be able to really execute and hold people accountable towards that vision. What it does is it builds accountability. It also allows you to see, is that goal achievable, and build other goals to get there. And then down to the technical. Every individual should know exactly what the roles are, what's expected of it, and drive them to that benchmark and making sure that benchmark is achievable. And so if you're doing that, you are really building a model that will get to wherever you need to go. You also have to realize that there are always adversity. Maybe there's a competitor that comes into your market space. Maybe there's a technology that has disrupted your area. Potentially there's economic or geopolitical reasons or certain other risks that get known. Take those risks, take those barriers, and then find solutions to them and build frameworks around it so that you can lower your risk. You have, essentially cooperative plans so that you can be sustainable and really driving solutions to be the best. But in order to do that, you have to adapt. You have to be able to take in input, and doesn't mean that you take in all of everything that's shown, right? Everyone says AI. That's great. How does it work in my company? What is the return on investment for it? And what are the governances that is going to make the most for my company? And it's not just AI, it's every tool, every individual, every input, and every output. And once you have that analytical basis, you can be personal to the people in your organizations and understand they're people and you want them to be great and be successful. But as far as the operations behind it, it's going to run like a machine and it's going to drive either the bottom line or in public entities, give you the most efficient and effective outputs based on the budget at hand.
If you were brought into a struggling organization today, what would be the first thing you would assess before making any major decision?
You have to be quiet and you have to listen. So the big thing is observation. Now, I have been in organizations that you go into it and there are certain red flags. If it is unlawful, if it is unethical, if it is going to potentially be a large risk to the company, you want to address those things first. Assuming you have a good framework, good ethical, legal framework, and the struggling is somewhere else, you want to get to know holistically the organization. And so get to know that department, get to know that maybe the location, or, if you're in the enterprise suite, you get to know, essentially at large, each location, each individual, and just kind of understand, how does this work? Once you have an understanding of how it works, you want to see, how does it work with each department, each other location, each supplier, each vendor. So you want to look at all the stakeholders at hand. Once you have a good idea, then you want to get visibility. So as you're observing, you're getting visibility into the entire operation, all the stakeholders that are involved. Now it's getting the data behind it. And so in order to do that, they may be looking at your workflows, looking at the systems at hand, making sure that nothing is outdated, looking at maybe there's better roles, and looking at low-hanging fruit, giving the largest return on investment. And that's how you start to change. Once you start doing that, change can come rapid. Now, change is hard. There's a lot of frameworks and there's a lot of great tools to bring in organizational change. But understand, change brings the same thing to people as grieving, as losing someone. And so you also need to put in frameworks, understand that people will go through shock, people will go through depression, people will go through these areas, and some of them will stay in it. And the last thing you want to do is have an angry or depressed or somebody that's not bought in. The best way to do that is bring them into the change themselves. So drive empowerment, because the individuals at hand know the organization, maybe have been with the organization longer, understand things that maybe are not on paper, or things that they're doing to be that hero. And so you bring people on, you understand and give them the empowerment, and then you start really supporting them, but making sure that it's not giving more work. I think a lot of times we can bring in all these initiatives and another initiative and another initiative, and it's building more and more paperwork or more administration or more checks and balances. That is fine as long as you're building in tools that can drive automation, where you're not giving people more work, but you're showing them that, hey, I'm going to make this easier for you. I'm going to solve these problems you're having. I'm going to bring out these bottlenecks so that you can do your job effectively and efficiently. And once you start doing that, you can make gigantic transformations in a very short period of time.
Throughout your career, you have reinvented yourself multiple times. What advice would you give professionals who are considering a significant career transition?
I think the biggest thing is, you got to be open to change and be a lifelong learner. And so if I'm trying to better myself every single day towards an area, it will allow and shape the opportunity. I was told by someone, if you want to make God laugh, create a plan. And so I think a business, you do need a business plan. You do need a strategic vision. You do need to have a roadmap. But there is a truth to that, where you really have this journey. And if you're in a position where you're just going to be humble enough to try to better yourself for others, and you're just trying to drive change where the area of responsibility is, opportunities will arise. People will reach out to you. Things will be presented to you that maybe have never been presented. Once that happens, you have to get the courage to decide to make that change and do it. And it takes a lot of resiliency. Sometimes you have to do it alone. Sometimes you'll get a lot of backlash. And it's one of those things of, as long as you're holding to ethical principles and you're trying to do the right thing each and every time, you can really go no wrong. It doesn't mean that it's going to be easy, but it will bring you on this path that essentially the path is your own, but it's a path that will always be in growth and essentially always be making a difference.
What leadership habits do you believe will become increasingly important over the next decade as technology continues to reshape business?
Technology, again, is a tool, but it's a tool that will really take some of the repetitiveness, some of the things that are administrative out of the picture. There's a lot of other great tools as far as media and some of that generative as well. But it's going to drive people to be innovative, be creators. It's going to drive people to be critical thinkers. And it's going to bring us back to being a relationship. And so I know sometimes it can be tough, especially if you're in a remote environment or if your teams are in different parts, different locations, different time zones. But it's building that interconnectedness with your team and then letting the tools take care of the administrative burdens and then driving people to drive value, to solve problems, look for solutions. And so it's going to be this shift to really drive that. The other thing is you're going to need people to be basically system analysts where, now each person is going to drive their own department, their own team, and build layouts to be efficient and effective. And so we're going to get into this place that is very efficient, very effective. But if you don't have these things in place, you're not going to be competitive, or you're really not going to be as competitive as someone that would.
If you could change one misconception about people and about leadership, what would it be?
I think a big one is leadership is not titles. And so a lot of times I came from a military organization where there is a clear chain of command. But I also remember a time where I was in a field event as an enlisted soldier. I was on orders and I was brought to be the battle captain for a very, very large exercise. It was Operation Global Medic. And so it wasn't necessarily my title. That doesn't mean I'm going to disrespect my leaders and those who have quote unquote rank above me, but I'm going to take whatever I'm given, whatever responsibilities I'm given, and I'm going to own that. That is my ownership. And I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that I am taking care of that responsibility. And the beautiful part of that is you don't know how much power you have when you're taking care of something. And usually those individuals that can take care of what's given will be given more and given more. And I think, the misconceptions for company is I'm just going to give people individuals where I can condense 17 different job titles into one. That's not necessarily true. There is capacity that you want to address, as well as you want to make sure that people are honed in and utilized in skills. However, when you can utilize that much responsibilities, you should be in a position where you can translate or communicate to go to that next position. And you should be able to be successful in that position because you have that greater responsibility that you've already done and already proven. And so it's one of those things of not everybody's going to be a CEO. Not everyone's going to be a vice president, director, etc. But every individual can really hone in on what they're given and be a leader. Not to mention, it's not always about working. You could be a leader in your organization, in your community. There is a lot of other places you can be a leader. I think every person who is a great parent is a leader. It takes a lot to raise kids. You are, as long as you're responsible for that child, you're in leadership. And so it's not necessarily the title, but it is being responsible and honing in and taking care of and getting to wherever that end result is.
So, Joe, is there anything that you would like to discuss with our audience for today?
I think one of the big things I like to give always at the end of any podcast, speech, etc., is find a problem and try to solve it. And you don't have to solve it alone. Go out and try to make an impact. I think there's a lot of times that we're sitting in front of a screen, we're doing things that aren't productive, and we're not contributing to society. We really need to start building a framework that's helping each other, that's solving problems, that is making a difference, so that we can really set up a great example and a great framework for the next generations to come. And I'm very excited if we can all do that, what this world will become for our children and our children's children.
Okay, so if our audience wants to connect with you, where would they connect with you from?
I do have a portfolio website. It's joelklemmer.com. There are links to that. I think I'm, a quick Google search, and there's a lot of different ways that you can connect. My books are in most major bookstores, Walmart, Barnes and Nobles, Books a Million, Amazon, and it is available worldwide. And then as far as social media, I think I'm most active on LinkedIn, and that is me who answers. And so if you're looking to connect with me directly, that's probably the easiest and the best way to go. But I will always try to be responsive and see what I can do to help.
Joel, thank you so much for sharing your incredible journey with us and your valuable lesson you have learned across business, government, military service, and leadership. Your insight remind us that true leadership isn't simply about having vision, it's about creating systems, developing people, and building organizations that continue to strive long after we have gone. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on Build with Sophia.
Thank you so much for having me.
Until next time, keep building with purpose, lead with integrity, and remember, find a problem and try to solve it by going out so you won't solve the problem alone. Thank you for listening, and this is Build with Sophia.